Where's my son's money, Gordon?
Leon, calm down. You're making a scene. $11. That trust had nearly $1 million in it. Investments go down. The market. I told you it was a rough stretch. A rough stretch. Read it. $11, Gordon. On my son's 18th birthday.
You don't understand how these things work. There are fees. There are losses. I did the best anyone could.
Then where are the reports? The real ones, not the ones you mailed me.
You got a report every year? You signed off on every one.
I signed what you handed me. Because you're my brother. Because I trusted you with the one thing I couldn't lose.
He doesn't even know what we're talking about. Leon, take him home. This isn't good for him.
And that was the wrong thing to say, because Silas's hand moved to the tablet mounted on his chair, slow and deliberate, the way every movement came to him, and he tapped 4 times, and the flat electronic voice spoke into the middle of the store. 900, 2000. The store went quiet.
Where's my son's money, Gordon?
Leon, calm down. You're making a scene. $11. That trust had nearly $1 million in it. Investments go down. The market. I told you it was a rough stretch. A rough stretch. Read it. $11, Gordon. On my son's 18th birthday.
You don't understand how these things work. There are fees. There are losses. I did the best anyone could.
Then where are the reports? The real ones, not the ones you mailed me.
You got a report every year? You signed off on every one.
I signed what you handed me. Because you're my brother. Because I trusted you with the one thing I couldn't lose.
He doesn't even know what we're talking about. Leon, take him home. This isn't good for him.
And that was the wrong thing to say, because Silas's hand moved to the tablet mounted on his chair, slow and deliberate, the way every movement came to him, and he tapped 4 times, and the flat electronic voice spoke into the middle of the store. 900, 2000. The store went quiet. That's what was in it, the device said, in that even, patient voice, as Silas kept tapping. When it started, $900, $2,000. Gordon stared at his nephew as if a chair had spoken. Ask him, the device said. Tap, tap. Ask me where it went. I kept the numbers. I kept all of them. Leon looked at his son and then at his brother, and he watched Gordon's face do something it had never done in front of him before. It went pale. Not the pale of a man who has lost money in a bad market. The pale of a man who has just realized the one witness he never counted on has been counting the whole time. Leon Hartley was 48 years old, and he had spent the last 18 of those years as the only parent his son had. Silas had been born too early and starved of oxygen too long, a delivery gone wrong at a hospital that later paid a great deal of money to make the lawsuit disappear. Cerebral palsy, the doctor said. He would use a wheelchair. His speech would never come easily. Some of them, in the careful voices doctors use, suggested Leon consider what kind of life this would be. Leon had considered it. He had decided it would be a good one, and then he had spent everything he had making that true. His wife, Sheila, had not been able to stay. The weight of it, the endless appointments, the nights, the way a disabled child rearranges a marriage into something that is all logistics and no rest, had broken her, and she had left when Silas was 3. Leon did not hate her for it, not anymore. He had simply become both parents, and a repairman who could set his own hours, and a man whose whole life narrowed down to one wheelchair and the bright, watchful mind sitting in it. Because Silas's mind was bright. That was the thing the doctors had never measured, and the thing almost no one bothered to see. His body would not obey him, and his mouth would not shape the words, so the world looked at him and quietly filed him under cannot. But behind the eyes that could not quite hold still, Silas Hartley was sharp as a blade, and he had a gift, an unusual one, for numbers. He remembered them. He loved them. He arranged them in his head the way other people hum songs. And 11 years ago, when the settlement money went into a special needs trust to take care of Silas for the rest of his life, they had made Leon's older brother the trustee, Gordon, the one who was good with money, the responsible one, the one everybody trusted. Nobody had thought to ask the kid in the wheelchair to keep an eye on it. Why would they? He couldn't even talk. I had kept an eye on all of it. It was supposed to be the best day. That was the part Leon kept catching on later. For weeks, he had been telling Silas that 18 was when things opened up, when the trust that had waited his whole childhood would finally do what it was for, pay for a real college program, a place of his own someday, the surgery, the van, a life with a little room in it. They had gone to the bank that morning almost like it was a celebration. Silas in a good shirt, Leon nervous and proud, and a teller had looked at the account and looked again and gotten a manager, and the manager had slid a single page across the desk with a number on it that did not make sense. And the best day of Silas's life had turned, in the space of a minute, into the day he learned his own future had been carried out the back door years ago. That was why Leon had driven straight to the hardware store with the page in his fist. A man can absorb a lot quietly. He cannot always absorb watching his son dressed up for a future that someone had already stolen. That night, after the store, Leon sat at the kitchen table with his son and learned the shape of what he had missed. Silas had a folder, not a metaphor, an actual folder, worn soft at the corners, that he had kept in the pocket of his chair for years. Inside were pages, some printed, some in the careful block letters Silas could manage when he took his time, some in columns his aide had helped him type. And here was the thing Gordon had never accounted for. The bank that held the trust mailed its own statements, plain and automatic, to the account's address of record, which was the house on Leon Street. Every quarter, without fail, the real numbers arrived with the bank's name at the top, a thing Gordon could not intercept from across town. Leon barely glanced at those envelopes. He filed them unread because he trusted the tidy yearly summary his brother mailed separately and figured the bank paper was just noise. But Silas read every one. He asked to see each statement before his father put it away, and he copied the figures, because the numbers were the most interesting thing that came to that house. He had a record going back nearly a decade, taken straight from the bank's own mailings, and that record did not match the reports Gordon sent. Leon spread Gordon's official reports next to Silas's copies of the bank statements, and even a man who called himself bad with money could see it. In the early years, everything agreed. The trust had started near $900,000 and eased down slowly through Silas's childhood, $100 and some thousand over 5 years, spent on exactly what the trust was for, the therapies and equipment, and the aid that insurance never fully covered. That was normal. That was the plan working. Then, around 6 years back, the two sets of numbers came apart. The bank's own statements showed the balance dropping hard, sometimes by tens of thousands at a time, in ways a careful trust for a disabled child should never move. But the polished annual summaries Gordon mailed, Leon showed something else, a balance that dipped gently and recovered, a story of prudent management and ordinary markets. Two sets of numbers for the same account, and they had matched right up until the year the money started disappearing. One of them was a lie, and Silas had been quietly holding the truth, the bank's truth, in a folder in his wheelchair the entire time. "Why didn't you tell me?" Leon said, and his voice broke on it, because the guilt was already climbing up his throat. Silas tapped, slow and even. "You trusted him. I didn't want to be the one who broke that. I kept the numbers so that if I was ever wrong, I could see it." A pause, more taps. "I was not wrong." Leon put his face in his hands. 11 years of signing whatever his brother handed him, because Gordon was the smart one and Leon was just the guy who fixed dishwashers. And all that time, the answer had been sitting at his own table, in the one person everyone in the family talked over. Leon thought back over the years then, and the memories rearranged themselves into something unbearable. All those family dinners where Gordon would arrive with a folder and go over the trust business with Leon at one end of the table while Silas sat at the other, and Gordon would say, without lowering his voice, things like, "There's no point walking him through it. He can't follow this," as though the young man were a piece of furniture and not a person with working ears and a mind like a bank vault. Leon had let it happen. Everyone had. And the whole time, Silas had been sitting there absorbing every figure Gordon said out loud, filing it next to the statements he had copied, quietly building the case that would one day undo the man who could not be bothered to speak to him. It was the cruelest kind of arrogance, the kind that robs you and insults you in the same motion, and it had a flaw Gordon never saw. which is that a person you refuse to talk to is a person who has nothing to do but listen. Silas had listened for 11 years. He had a better memory of the trust than the trustee did. The thing about Silas and numbers was that they had always been the place he was most free. His body was a daily negotiation, and his speech was a slow, effortful thing. But numbers were instant and orderly, and they never once talked over him. He could hold a column of figures in his head and turn it around like a key. When he was small, before anyone understood how much was going on behind his eyes, Teresa had figured it out by handing him harder and harder arithmetic and watching him solve it faster than the children who could run and shout. For Silas, keeping the trust's numbers had not started as suspicion. It had started as love, the way another kid might collect baseball cards. He wrote them down because they were beautiful to him. It was only later, when the beautiful numbers started contradicting the numbers his uncle mailed, that love turned slowly into evidence. Hy did what most people do first, which is assume that the truth, once you can see it, will be simple to prove. He was wrong, and he learned it fast, because Gordon had not stolen the money the way a burglar steals a television. Gordon had been the trustee. The law had handed him the keys and broad discretion to invest, to spend, to manage, and the line between a trustee who made bad choices and a trustee who stole is not a wall, it is a fog, and Gordon had spent years thickening it. When Leon called a lawyer, the first thing he heard was how hard these cases are. Trustees have latitude. Losses happen. To win, you do not just point at an empty account. You have to force a full accounting, prove the money went somewhere it should not have, and show the trustee breached his duty on purpose. And the trustee, meanwhile, controls the records. The family, what there was of it, lined up exactly where families line up, which is against the person making noise. An aunt called and begged Leon not to tear the family apart. Said Gordon had always been generous, said surely there was an explanation, said think of your mother's memory. A cousin suggested that maybe Leon had mismanaged his own expectations, that trusts lose money, that he should be grateful Gordon had handled the burden at all. Nobody said the plain thing, which was that a man had been given a disabled child's lifetime of care to protect and had emptied it. They just wanted Leon to stop making everyone uncomfortable. Leon was not going to stop. He found the lawyer through Silas's aide, the one person outside the house who had always treated Silas like a full human being. Teresa Aldana had worked with Silas for 6 years, in school and out, and she was the reason he could type as fast as he did, the reason he had a voice at all, and she had never once talked over him. When Leon told her what was happening, her jaw set, and she made a call, and she gave him a name, Adele Prosser. A lawyer who did nothing but trust and fiduciary litigation, who had spent a career prying open the books of trustees who thought no one would ever look. Adele listened to the whole story without interrupting, which almost no one had done. Then she looked at Silas's folder for a long time, page after page, and she looked at Gordon's glossy reports, and when she finally spoke, she spoke to Silas, not to Leon, which Silas noticed, because almost no one did. "These records you kept," Adele said. "Did you write down where you saw each number, the date, the statement it came from?" Silas tapped. "Yes, everyone, date, source, balance. I like sources." Adele almost smiled. "So do I." She turned to Leon. "Here's what your brother is counting on. He's counting on a courtroom seeing a grieving family and a complicated trust and a disabled young man everyone assumes can't follow the math and deciding it's all too murky to untangle. He's counting on nobody actually doing the arithmetic. That's his entire defense, and your son just handed me the one thing that beats it. A contemporaneous record, kept by the beneficiary, that we can check against the bank's own history. We are going to make him produce every real statement, every check, every transfer for 11 years, and then we are going to lay it next to what he told you and next to what Silas wrote down. The truth is in the bank's records whether Gordon likes it or not. Trustees always forget that. They control the reports. They do not control the bank." Adele filed a petition to compel a full accounting, and Gordon did what every cornered trustee does, which is turn the process itself into a weapon. He asked for extensions. His lawyer sent letters full of reasons the request was burdensome. He produced a few documents and claimed the rest were lost, misfiled, destroyed in a flood at the store, a story that changed slightly each time he told it. He was not defending himself so much as running out the clock, betting that a repairman and a disabled young man would give up before the fees and the delays and the exhaustion wore them down. It was a good bet against most families. It was a bad bet against a man who had already lost 11 years to trusting his brother and had decided he would not lose one more, and against a lawyer who had seen every stall in the book. When Gordon would not produce the records, Adele simply went around him. She subpoenaed the bank directly and brought in a forensic accountant to walk the money backward, because the one set of records a trustee cannot hide, lose, or flood is the one the bank keeps for him. It took weeks, and it was tedious, and it was devastating, because the real records, the ones Gordon did not control, told a story that lined up almost exactly with the numbers a disabled young man had been keeping in a folder in his wheelchair. The money had not been lost to the market. There had barely been a market involved. Over 11 years, the trust that was supposed to sit quietly and grow for Silas's care had been bled into one place, and that place was Hartley's Hardware. The forensic accountant traced it line by line. Loans from the trust to Gordon's business, documented as investments, that were never repaid. A steady trustee management fee Gordon had paid himself, far above anything reasonable, that grew fatter in exactly the years the store was drowning. Transfers to a company account, then out to cover the store's payroll, its rent, its debts. Gordon had used his disabled nephew's settlement as a private line of credit to keep a dying hardware store on life support, telling himself every time that he would put it back. And every year the reports he mailed Leon papered over the hole with numbers he simply made up. Nearly $800,000. That was the size of it. Gone into paint and lumber and a business that was going to fail anyway, taking a young man's future down with it. That was the scale of it. But the scale was not the worst part. The worst part was what Gordon had said no to. Because a trust like Silas's does not just sit there. It is meant to be spent, carefully, on the things a disabled person needs, and public benefits do not cover. And over the years, there had been things Silas needed. When Silas was 12, an orthopedic surgeon had recommended a procedure to release the tightening tendons in his legs, a surgery that would have eased his pain and kept him from losing mobility he could not afford to lose. It cost $60,000. Leon had asked Gordon, as trustee, to approve it from the trust. Gordon had come back grave and sorry and said the trust could not carry it right now, that the timing was bad, that they should wait for a better year. They had waited. The better year never came. Silas had the surgery late, on a county program, after damage had already set in that the earlier operation would have prevented. Leon remembered the day he had asked, and remembering it now, with the truth in his hands, made him physically sick. He had driven to the hardware store with the surgeon's letter, hopeful, because for once the trust was supposed to be exactly for this. Gordon had read the letter behind the counter, and he had gotten a look on his face that Leon had mistaken for genuine sorrow, and he had put a hand on Leon's shoulder and said the trust was in a tough spot that year, that the investments were down, that they had to be careful or Silas would have nothing left for later. Later, as if there were some worse day coming that they were saving Silas's ruined legs for. Leon had believed him. Leon had gone home and told his 12-year-old that the surgery would have to wait. And he had watched the disappointment settle over his son's face, and he had felt like a failure of a father, never once suspecting that the money for the surgery had already been spent keeping the very counter Gordon was standing behind from going dark. Silas had spent 2 years in worsening pain so that a hardware store could make payroll, and the man who arranged it had comforted the father about it with a warm hand and a sad face. And there was the van. For years, Leon had loaded and unloaded his son's chair by hand, in and out of an old sedan, his back going, because the trust couldn't afford the accessible van that would have given them both some dignity. Gordon had said no to the van. Gordon had said no to a specialized communication device the school recommended. Gordon had said no, gently, sadly, responsibly, again and again, to the things that would have made a disabled child's life less hard. And he had said no for one simple reason that he could never admit out loud. The money was not there. He had already moved it into his store. Approving a real, documented $60,000 surgery would have meant cutting a check the account could not cover or producing a true balance that would have exposed the hole on the spot. He was not protecting Silas's future by saying no. He was protecting himself, because every legitimate expense he approved was one he could no longer pay from a trust he had already drained. Silas had gone without surgery, without a van, without ease, for years, so that his uncle could keep a hardware store open and hide a theft. The young man had paid for the cover-up with his own body. If someone has ever been handed the care of a person who cannot fully protect themselves, a child, a parent, someone disabled, someone old, and if that someone starts telling you there is never quite enough, that the timing is always bad, that the help will have to wait, Look at where the money actually goes before you accept that there is none. Because the cruelest thefts are not the ones that take a fortune. They are the ones that take it from the person who needed it most and could fight back the least, and then dress it up as doing their best. Silas took it harder than any of them, and quieter. He had known, in the abstract, that the numbers were wrong. He had not known, until the forensic accountant laid it out, that the reason he had spent 2 extra years in pain, the reason his legs were worse than they had to be, was that his uncle had chosen a store over him. He sat very still when he understood it. Then he tapped, slowly, and the flat voice said the thing that broke his father in half. He let me hurt, to hide the money. He looked at me every Christmas and let me hurt. Leon pulled his son into his arms, chair and all, and held on. And Gordon, sensing the walls closing, made his ugliest move yet. Through his lawyer, he began to suggest that Silas, now 18, was not competent to be involved in his own trust litigation, that the so-called records were the product of a disabled young man who did not really understand them. Coached by an angry father, he moved to have Silas's capacity evaluated, to have his voice, the AAC device, the folder, all of it, set aside as unreliable. It was the same instinct that had let him rob the trust in the first place, the bone-deep assumption that the kid in the wheelchair did not count, could not count, and could safely be talked over. He's trying to erase you, Adele told Silas plainly, because she did not soften things for him the way people did. He robbed you because he was sure you'd never understand. Now he needs a court to agree you don't, which means the whole case is going to come down to one question, and it's a question about you. She leaned forward. So we are going to answer it in a room, out loud, in your own words. And your uncle is going to have to sit there and listen to the one person he was certain couldn't count every dollar he took. Gordon pressed his advantage the only way he had left, which was to lean on the family and on Leon's own guilt. He came to the house one evening, uninvited, without a lawyer, wearing the face of a wronged older brother. He sat in Leon's kitchen, and he did not deny the money this time. He explained it. He talked about the store their father had left them, how he could not let it die on his watch, how he had always meant to pay it back, how the market had made it impossible, how Leon had no idea the pressure he had carried alone all these years. And then he made his offer, which was really a threat with a sad voice. Drop the case. Let it go. He would sign the store over, sell what he could, pay back what he was able, maybe a couple $100,000 over time, and they would keep it in the family and out of the papers. Or Leon could drag his own brother through a courtroom, put a disabled young man on a witness stand to be picked apart, spend years and money he didn't have, and probably still lose because who was a judge going to believe? A respected businessman or a repairman and a young man who talked through a machine. You'll put Silas through that? Gordon said softly. For what? Pride? I'm offering you something real. Take it. Don't make that child a spectacle. For one long night, Leon almost took it. Not because he believed Gordon, but because the guilt had its hands around his throat. It had been his job to protect Silas, and he had signed the reports, and he had waited on the surgery, and some cruel voice in him said that a father who had already failed his son this badly had no right to gamble the kid's last chance on a courtroom. A couple $100,000 was real. A trial was a risk. Maybe, the voice said, you take the sure thing, because you already proved you can't be trusted to choose. Then Silas, who missed nothing, tapped out a single line at the breakfast table the next morning, having heard every word through the thin walls the night before. If we take his deal, he decides what I was worth. I want a judge to decide, and I want to be the one who tells them. Leon looked at his son, at the calm in him, at the spine in a body that had never once been easy to live in, and he was ashamed of the voice in his head, and he let it go. He's counting on us being too tired and too ashamed to fight, Leon told Adele the next morning. He's counting on me thinking I don't deserve to win because I let it happen. And he's counting on everybody in that courtroom looking at my son and seeing less than what's there. His jaw set. So, let's put Silas in front of them. Let's let Gordon stand up and say the kid doesn't understand his own money, and then let's let the kid answer. Adele built the case on the one thing Gordon could never spin, the objective record. The bank's own statements, pulled straight from the bank under subpoena, would sit on the screen beside Silas's folder and beside the glossy summaries Gordon had mailed home for years. 2 of those 3 would match each other line for line. The bank and the Sun, and the third, Gordon's, would tell a different and impossible story. You cannot cross-examine arithmetic. No amount of grieving brother testimony changes what a bank recorded on the day it happened. As for the competency smear, Adele refused to turn it into a battle of dueling experts, because that was the fight Gordon wanted. A fog of reports where a judge might just defer to the respectable man. She had a neutral evaluation done quietly, to have in her pocket, but she had no intention of winning the question with a psychologist's paperwork. She would win it the only way that could not be argued with. She would let the court hear Silas answer for himself. "We are not going to trap your brother into anything," Adele told Leon. "We do not need to. We just stop shielding him from what he already did. He built this whole theft on one belief, that Silas does not count and cannot count. And he is about to carry that same belief into a courtroom with the bank records already on the screen. The more certain he is that your son can't follow the money, the more that room is going to remember the moment your son follows it better than anyone in it. His contempt for Silas isn't our weapon. It's just the blind spot that let him rob a child for 11 years, and it's about to cost him." The night before the hearing, Silas practiced with Teresa. Not the numbers. He had those cold, but the pace, the breathing, how to stay steady when a lawyer tried to rattle him, how not to let a room full of people who would underestimate him make him rush. At one point, he stopped and typed something to his father, who was sitting in the corner pretending not to be terrified. "You did not fail me," the voice said. "You stayed. He is the one who left, in every way that counts. Tomorrow they will see who actually showed up for me." Leon could not answer that for a while. When he could, all he said was that he was proud of him, and Silas tapped back that he knew, and that it went both ways. The hearing was held in a probate courtroom with high windows and a judge who had spent a long career watching people do quiet, legal-looking things to the vulnerable. Leon sat at the front table next to Adele. Silas sat beside him in his chair, the tablet on its mount, the worn folder in his lap. Teresa sat just behind, close enough to help if the device jammed. Across the aisle sat Gordon, in a good suit, next to a lawyer he was paying with money that did not exist anymore, wearing the tired, dignified look of a man who wanted everyone to know how unfair this all was. Gordon's lawyer went first, and he built the whole thing on two pillars. The first was sympathy. His client was a devoted brother and uncle who had taken on the thankless job of managing a difficult trust for 11 years, who had made some investments that did not pan out in hard economic times, and who was now being persecuted by a grieving family looking for someone to blame for ordinary losses. "Trustees are not insurers," he said. "Losing money is not the same as stealing it." The second pillar was uglier, and he built it more carefully. The petitioner, he said, was relying heavily on records supposedly kept by the beneficiary, but the beneficiary was a young man with significant disabilities, nonverbal, communicating through a device, and with respect, the court simply could not credit a complex financial reconstruction to someone in his condition. These were, he suggested gently, an angry father's numbers put in a vulnerable young man's mouth. He said it kindly. That was the worst part. He said it the way Gordon had said no to the surgery, sorrowful and reasonable, and he sat down, certain the room was with him. Adele stood up, and she did not rush. She began with the thing Gordon could not talk his way around, the bank's own records. She put the forensic accountant on the stand, and the accountant walked the court through 11 years of the real account, not the mailed reports, the actual transactions the bank had produced under subpoena. The loans from the trust to Hartley's Hardware, booked as investments, never repaid. The swollen management fees that spiked in the store's worst years. The transfers out to cover a failing business's payroll and rent. Nearly $800,000, moving in a pattern no honest trustee could explain, all of it flowing one direction, from a disabled child's future into a dying store. It was not a market. It was a siphon. Gordon took the stand in his own defense, because his lawyer needed the judge to see the devoted brother and not just the numbers, and Adele let him talk, because she had told Leon that the whole thing turned on letting Gordon commit to his story first. Gordon was, in his way, good. He spoke with a heavy, dignified sadness about the burden he had carried, about markets and downturns, and how thankless it was to manage money for family, about how he had always acted in Silas's best interest. He said he had made honest investments that had not worked out. He said the management fees were fair for the work involved. He said he loved his nephew and had done his level best, and that it broke his heart to be accused this way. He committed to all of it. Under oath, on the record, sure, the sympathy was his. Then Adele rose to cross-examine, and she was very calm. "You've testified these were honest investments that lost money. Where did the trust invest, Mr. Hartley? Name one fund, one stock." Gordon hesitated. "It was a mix, various things. I'd have to check my records." Your records show the money went to Hartley's Hardware. Your store. Is your store one of the honest investments that didn't work out? I invested the trust in a family business. That's legal. Loaning a disabled child's trust to your own failing company, then never repaying it, and paying yourself a fee to do it. You've testified that was in Silas's best interest. Adele let it sit. When you told your brother in that store that the trust couldn't afford Silas's $60,000 surgery, how much had you already moved to your business that year? Gordon's mouth opened and closed. I don't recall the exact figure. Your nephew does, Adele said quietly. He'll be up here shortly. And she sat down, and the dignified sadness on Gordon's face had cracked, and underneath it was something small and cornered, and the whole room had seen it. Then Adele addressed the second pillar, the one about Silas, and she did not do it with a stack of expert reports because she had promised herself she would not let the question disappear into a fog of psychology. She had a neutral evaluation in her file, and she referenced it in a single sentence, its finding plain and unglamorous, that the disability was physical and expressive, and not cognitive. But she did not dwell on it. Instead, she simply asked the court's permission to let Silas answer the accusation himself. Gordon's lawyer objected hard, insisting the young man could not meaningfully testify, which was, Adele noted quietly for the record, the very assumption the whole case was about. The judge looked at Silas for a long moment, and then allowed it, and something shifted in the room. Before Silas spoke, though, Adele called Teresa Aldana, because a room that has spent years underestimating a young man needs to be walked toward him carefully, and Teresa had spent 6 years doing exactly that. She took the stand plainly, a working woman in a cardigan, and she told the court who Silas actually was. She testified that she had helped him learn to use his device, and that the limiting factor had never been his understanding, only his speed, that a mind moving at full speed was trapped behind a body and a machine that could not keep up with it. She testified that he was one of the brightest students she had ever worked with, that his memory for numbers was genuinely exceptional, and that she had personally watched him copy and organize the trust statements over the years, unprompted because he found them fascinating. Gordon's lawyer tried to suggest she was biased, that of course an aide would defend her student, and Teresa looked at him without any heat at all. I've sat in a lot of rooms where people talked about Silas like he wasn't in them, she said. Doctors, relatives, his uncle, plenty of times. And Silas just watched and remembered, because that's what you learn to do when the world decides your body is the same thing as your mind. It isn't. I've spent 6 years watching people underestimate that young man. It has never once worked out for them, and it is not going to work out today. She stepped down, and the room was quieter than it had been, and it was ready, finally, to listen. Silas wheeled himself to the space beside the bench. He set his folder on the tray. And then, tap by patient tap, in the flat and even voice of the device, Silas Hartley told the court where the money went. He did not need the accountant's charts. He had them in his head. He gave the starting balance, $902,000, and the year. He gave the first loan to the store, the amount, the date, the statement it appeared on. He walked forward year by year, balance by balance, matching each number to the bank's own records as Adele put them on the screen. And every single one lined up because he had copied them from the real statements as they came before Gordon ever learned to fake them. He showed where Gordon's mailed reports and the bank's truth split apart, the exact year the two sets of numbers began to lie to each other. It took a long time. The device is not fast. Nobody in that courtroom moved because it is one thing to read a forensic report and another to watch the young man everyone had written off for sight, from memory, the anatomy of his own robbery. And then Adele asked him one last question, quietly. She asked him what the trust had told him no to. Silas tapped for a while. Then the voice said, "A surgery on my legs. I was 12, it cost $60,000. He said the trust could not afford it." A pause, more taps. "There was over $700,000 in it that year. I know because I wrote it down that month. He had already started taking it. I waited 2 years. My legs are worse now than they had to be." Another pause. "He did not run out of money for me. He spent my money and then told me there was none. I kept the numbers because I thought one day someone would ask. Thank you for asking." The courtroom was very quiet. Gordon was looking at the table. His lawyer fought on because that is the job. And for a few minutes, it was closer than it should have been because a courtroom leans toward a respectable man and a family tragedy and away from calling an uncle a thief. He argued discretion, hard times, good intentions, but you cannot argue with the bank's own ledger and a beneficiary who just matched it from memory, and the judge had watched Silas do exactly that. The ruling came from the bench, and it was total. The court found that Gordon Hartley had breached his fiduciary duty in the gravest way through self-dealing, falsified accountings, and the systematic conversion of trust assets to prop up his own business. He was surcharged for the full amount taken, plus interest, plus Silas's legal costs. He was removed as trustee on the spot, and a professional fiduciary appointed in his place. And the judge, plainly angry, referred the entire matter, the theft, the falsified reports, the deprivation of a disabled dependent's care, to the district attorney, naming Gordon Hartley. Gordon did not look at Silas. He could not. He had built his whole crime on the certainty that this young man would never understand it, and he had just been forced to sit and listen to him understand all of it, out loud, better than anyone in the room. Leon looked at his brother and felt no triumph, only a tired, hollow grief for the family that had ended the day a man decided a child in a wheelchair did not count. The criminal side moved slower than the courtroom, the way it does, but it moved. Falsifying trust accountings and converting the assets of a disabled dependent are not the kinds of things a district attorney lets slide once they are laid out in a probate judge's order, and Gordon was charged. The store he had destroyed the trust to save went under anyway, sold off to satisfy the surcharge, its shelves emptied and its doors chained, and there was a bitter symmetry in it that no one felt good about. He had burned a child's future to keep a dying store alive, and in the end, he lost both, and the family too, and his freedom after that. Getting the money back was slow and imperfect, because that is how it always is, once a thief has turned a fortune into paint and lumber and paid off debts. But between the sale of the business, the surcharge judgment enforced against Gordon's own assets, and the professional fiduciary the court installed to chase every dollar, a great deal of it came back, and what could not be recovered in full was pursued relentlessly, following Gordon the way a debt follows a man who has run out of sad faces to wear. The trust was rebuilt, put in clean and careful hands, and pointed, at last, where it had always been meant to go, at Silas. And the things that had been denied him for so long stopped being denied. The accessible van came first because Leon's back had waited long enough, and so had his son's dignity. And the morning it was delivered, Leon rolled Silas up the ramp into a vehicle built for him. No lifting, no strain, just a father and a son going somewhere the easy way for once. And neither of them could quite talk on that first drive. They drove out past the edge of town, nowhere in particular, just to feel the thing work. For 18 years, getting Silas anywhere had been a production, the folding of the chair, the lifting, the strain on Leon's back that got a little worse every year, the small daily indignity of a life built for people who could stand. Now Silas rolled in and locked down, and they simply went. And somewhere on that empty road, Leon started to laugh. And then he was not laughing, and he had to pull over for a minute. He thought about all the years he had lifted his son in and out of a sedan, believing there was no money for anything better, believing it because his brother had told him so with a sad face. And he thought about how small a thing a van was against everything Gordon had taken, and how it was not a small thing at all. Silas reached over, slow, and put his hand on his father's arm, and tapped out one line with the other. "We're not late," the voice said. "We're just finally on time." And Leon put the van back in gear. The surgeons could not give back the 2 years Silas had lost, but they did what could still be done, and a specialist mapped out a real plan for his legs and his pain, paid for the way it should have been paid for all along. It would be a long road, months of it, and some of the damage from the years of waiting was permanent. And there was a grief in that no verdict could touch, the knowledge that a child had been made to hurt longer than he ever had to, so a man could hide a theft. But there was also, finally, forward motion, a plan on paper and money in the account to pay for it. And for the first time in years, Silas's future was a thing being built instead of a thing being taken. Leon sat in the consult and listened to the surgeon talk about what they could still fix. And he understood that some of the best justice does not undo the harm. It just makes sure the harm finally stops. There was money set aside now for college, because the young man who had reconstructed 11 years of fraud from memory had, it turned out, a rather obvious future in front of him. Something with numbers, something with records, some field that needed a mind that noticed everything and forgot nothing and could not be talked out of the truth. Silas knew exactly what he wanted to do, and when he told his father, the flat voice of the device somehow could not flatten it. He wanted to study forensic accounting. He wanted to be the person who sits across from the next Gordon and reads the money backward and finds the hole under the sad face. He had learned the hardest way there is that the people who steal from the vulnerable count on nobody doing the arithmetic. And he had discovered that he was very, very good at the arithmetic. He had spent 11 years being underestimated into silence, and he had decided to spend the rest of his life being the reason a thief's certainty that no one was watching turned out to be wrong. Adele, when she heard, told him to call her the day he graduated, that she had spent a career looking for people who could do what he had done in that courtroom, and that most of them could not do it half as well. Silas tapped back that he would hold her to it, and she believed him because Silas Hartley did not forget a number, and a promise was just a number that had not come due yet. Leon watched his son build a future out of the exact thing that had been used to rob him, and he thought that was the closest thing to justice he had ever seen, better even than the verdict. Gordon had looked at Silas and seen something broken and safe to take from. He had, without meaning to, created the one person most determined to make sure it never happened to anyone else. The hardest thing to repair was inside Leon, and it did not mend in a day. He carried the guilt of the signatures, the years he had trusted the wrong brother and doubted his own right to fight, the surgery his son had waited for while he deferred to a man he thought was smarter. Silas would not let him keep it. "You are measuring yourself by the one thing you got wrong," the device said one night, "and ignoring the 18 years you got right." He fooled a lot of people, doctors, lawyers, a judge almost. You are angry at yourself for not being harder to fool than all of them. A pause. You stayed. That is the whole test of a father. You passed it every single day. The town heard the story, the way towns do, and the shape of it surprised people, because the respectable businessman turned out to be the criminal, and the young man everyone had talked over turned out to be the sharpest mind in the room. People who had spent years addressing Silas's father instead of Silas, speaking slowly and loudly and past him, started, some of them, to speak to him. It was a small thing, and it was not a small thing. He had spent his whole life being underestimated, filed under cannot by people who never bothered to check, and a courtroom had just watched him prove that the one they were all sure did not understand had understood, quietly, the entire time. They robbed the one child they were sure would never understand. He understood every cent. That was the thing Gordon had gotten most wrong, more wrong even than the money. He had looked at a young man who could not run or speak easily, and he had seen someone safe to steal from. Someone who did not count and could not count, and he had built an 11-year theft on that single lazy certainty. He never once considered that the kid in the wheelchair by the door, the one he talked over every Christmas, was keeping the numbers. All of them. Date, source, balance, in a worn folder in the pocket of his chair, waiting, the way patient people wait, for the day someone would finally ask. They had counted on nobody keeping count. He always had been. And in the end, it was not the lawyers or the forensic accountant or even his father who brought the truth home. It was Silas, in his own even, unhurried, mechanical voice, saying the words he had been holding onto for most of his life. I was always listening. The room that had walked in ready to underestimate him walked out having watched him keep better count than the man they trusted, and Leon understood, at last, that the son the world kept filing under cannot had been the strongest one in the family all along.